Hey everyone, Tactics here with updated rankings of all the healer specs in Shadowlands Season 1, Raids, and Mythic Plus. This video includes all the tuning changes that have happened over the past several weeks, including the most recent balance changes that went in with Mythic Castle Nathria. I also have a similar video out for DPS specs, which you can check out on my channel or linked in the description below. As always, I do want to remind you guys that these rankings are only taking into account how specs are doing in Mythic rating and high level keystones, and mean a lot less in lower difficulties. In general, healer balance is quite good at the moment, so if you're someone looking to get your Keystone Master achievement or ahead of the curve, literally every spec is viable and more than capable of completing that. With that aside, if you enjoy this video, please make sure to like and subscribe for more Warcraft content, and let's start by looking at our B tier healers specs in Mythic Castle Nathria. Not much has changed here for healers, with all three pure throughput specs appearing in the B tier with Mistweaver Monks, Resto Druids, and Holy Priests. For these healers, their output isn't their issue, rather their lack of a raid-wide damage reduction leaves them lacking compared to their competition. On Mythic difficulties, these damage reduction abilities are invaluable, as healing throughput doesn't help if people are dying within seconds to big hits. Because of this fact, the healer specs without a raid-wide DR will always be a tier below those that have one, with certain exceptions such as on Sun King's Salvation. Getting into some more specifics, let's start with Mistweaver Monks. Monks have amazing single target throughput, completely independent from any sort of healing cooldowns, making them great for tank healing or for the previously mentioned Sun King fight. Because they can constantly pump out large amounts of single target healing, it can lead to mana issues if you aren't careful, especially in comparison to the other healers on this list. When it comes to cooldowns, Mistweavers are a bit lacking. Revival's healing pales in comparison to similar 3-minute throughput cooldowns, and Life Cocoon lacks a damage reduction element, though the Absorb Shield itself can be nice in certain situations. Their best cooldown is their new Invoke Yu'lon, which does a decent amount of raid healing, allowing you to spread HOTS to your raid, but it only spreads 6 at a time, so in larger group sizes this can take some time to ramp up. For utility, they bring the important Mystic Touch debuff, increasing the physical damage taken of enemies, as well as a snare removal and speed increase in Tiger's Lust, and a situational ad control spell in Ring of Peace. Unfortunately, all three of these tools can also be brought by any monk in general, and with both Windwalker and Brewmaster in decent spots at the moment, this can take away from the value of Mistweavers a fair bit. Next up, we have Holy Priests, who are extremely powerful at healing predictable bursts of raid damage, especially when the raid is stacked, thanks to the plethora of raid cooldowns at their disposal. Holy tends to have a bit of a bad rep, mostly due to the strength of Disc Priests, but a lot of people confuse Disc being strong with Holy being weak. Their biggest problem, like the rest of the healers in the B tier, is not their throughput, but rather their lack of a damage reduction cooldown. Holy has the pleasure of being directly compared to Disc in this regard, which has both a single target DR and an AoE DR, whereas Holy Priests have neither, instead having multiple throughput cooldowns as well as a single target healing increase in Guardian Spirit. Holy and Disc Priest also both bring the exact same utility, with situational spells like Mass Dispel, Shining Force, and Leap of Faith, as well as a mandatory raid buff in Fortitude, and a strong individual buff in the Returning Power Infusion. Not having anything unique here to differentiate Holy from Disc definitely hurts them, as when it comes to the actual healing toolkit, Holy just seems to constantly get the short end of the stick. Last up in the B tier we have Resto Druids, who tend to thrive in situations where there's constant raid-wide damage going out. This allows them to keep HOTS rolling on the raid, while also getting good value from Efflorescence and their major healing cooldown Tranquility. This does a lot more healing compared to the Mistweaver's Revival, and when combined with Flourish allows Resto Druids to have a powerful HOT on your entire raid for an extremely long time. The downside of this is that it must be channeled for 8 seconds, which can be difficult to do on some fights if it isn't timed correctly. Resto Druids also have the option to talent into Incarnation, making their spells much more mana efficient to assist in blanketing HOTS in periods of high damage, however this isn't always taken. Similar to Mistweavers and Holy Priests, Resto Druids lack a raid-wide damage reduction, though they do have a single target one available in Ironbark, great for tanks or someone that needs spot healing. In terms of utility, Resto Druids are alright in raids, as their strong Mythic Plus toolkit doesn't transfer over too well. They did gain Stampeding Roar in Shadowlands, which is a great movement spell previously only available to Feral and Guardian Druids. On top of this, they have Innervate for healer mana, and Heart of the Wild to be able to pump out extra damage in short bursts. Their more situational spells like Ursul's Vortex, Mass Entangle, and Typhoon, as previously mentioned, are more important in Mythic Plus than they are in raids. However, just like Mistweavers and Holy Priests, all this utility can be brought by other Druid specs, specifically Boomkins have all this utility and even more, and with them being in an especially good spot this tier, it definitely detracts from the value brought by a Resto Druid. Moving up to the A tier, we have Holy Paladins, who provide strong tank healing, some fantastic utility, as well as the highest damage out of any healer spec. On the cooldown front, like all Paladins, they have a great throughput cooldown in Wings, a raid-wide DR in Aura Mastery, a single target DR in Blessing of Sacrifice, and a powerful new cooldown in the Venthyr Covenant ability Ashen Hollow, which allows them to put out solid damage and healing in a large area over 30 seconds. Despite having a ton of healing cooldowns available to them, Holy Paladins do tend to have the lowest overall throughput out of any healer. However, the strength of Aura Mastery combined with their tank levels of damage more than makes up for their slightly lower healing throughput. Holy Paladins also bring their fantastic utility to solidify them in the A tier with a couple immunities, Blessing of Freedom, and their raid-wide 3% damage reduction in Devotion Aura. As with the other specs on this list, all this can be brought by other members of the same class. However, with the exception of Devotion Aura, these utilities are actually much more stackable than some of the ones previously mentioned, allowing Holy Paladin utility to hold its value even if your raid has other Paladins. Joining Paladins in the A tier, we have Disciplined Priests, who bring strong absorbs, damage reduction abilities, good damage, and of course, all the same utility brought by Holy Priests. When it comes to their cooldowns, the return of Spirit Shell has been fantastic for Disc, especially this tier where it lines up nicely with large damage events on many fights, especially later on in the raid. They also have Barrier for a group-wide damage reduction, and of course, Pain Suppression for a big single target DR. The main problem Disc Priest runs into is that they're a much higher skill cap than other healers, meaning you'll notice a big difference between a good Disc Priest and a bad Disc Priest, which mostly comes from the fact that healing is proactive instead of reactive, meaning they need to know the timings on the fight and set up to heal big damage instances. For high-end guilds, this usually isn't a problem, but it can be quite challenging for lower-end guilds, which can often result in Holy being a better overall choice despite having worse tools than Disc. And that leaves us with Resto Shamans as our lone S-tier healer, mostly thanks to their insane throughput at the moment, by far the best out of any healer, as well as their strong healer cooldowns. Healing Tide has less throughput than abilities like Tranquility and Divine Hymn, however it doesn't lock down the Shaman to a specific location to channel, allowing them to avoid mechanics easily and contribute additional healing on top of their cooldown. And let's not forget what is likely the best healer cooldown in the game in Spirit Link, providing a unique and irreplaceable health redistribution effect on top of a 10% DR. They do lack a single target DR, however the strength of Spirit Link combined with their strong overall throughput outweighs that one weakness for sure. Shaman utility is nothing to scoff at either, with strong utility totems such as Windrush for speed, Tremor for CC breaks, Ancestral Protection for situational group onks, and of course the returning Mana Tide to help with healer mana. Overall, Shamans bring fantastic utility, throughput, and cooldowns to every raid group, making them a must-have in Castle Nathria, and giving them the top spot for raid healing in the first tier. From there, let's dive into how healers are doing in Mythic Plus, and again, I just want to note that this is looking at how specs are doing specifically for higher key levels, since all 6 healer specs are more than viable enough to complete Keystone Master. To begin, again, we have Mistweaver Monks, where not having a single target DR hurts them a bit, however the Absorb of Life Cocoon isn't a terrible alternative. As mentioned previously, they have fantastic sustained single target healing, making them solid early on in the expansion as tanks have low gear and require more healer assistance, but as the expansion and even just the season goes on and tanks start getting better gear, the value of Mistweavers will slowly reduce. On top of this, Mistweavers have some of the lowest healer damage, which is a much more important consideration in dungeons. Some of their biggest boons are their strong mobility and durability, allowing them to get out of bad situations and survive high damage moments, and they also come with one of the best dungeon utility tools in the game in Ring of Peace. Their other utility also works well in dungeons, with Tiger's Lust allowing you to give your party members a little speed boost, and Mystic Touch buffing their physical damage, though this last one has much less value in Mythic Plus, as it buffs far fewer players and strongly depends on your group composition to have any value. They also have an AoE stun and leg sweep, which can be extremely useful in dungeon content. Overall, monks provide solid single target throughput, but their damage can be very lacking, and they don't have any form of external damage reduction, leaving them in the B tier for Mythic Plus. Joining them in the B tier are Holy Priests, for similar reasons, but also some different ones. For similarities, Holy Priests are also without an external damage reduction, and Guardian Spirit is definitely a bit lacking, though situationally can be extremely valuable if you get it to proc its Sheath Death effect. In terms of differences, Holy Priests both lack mobility and are quite squishy, making them a bit of a dangerous pick, especially in higher keys where unavoidable damage can be deadly. To make up for this, they do provide a bit more damage than Mistweavers and also have a larger amount of utility. As mentioned in the raid section, priests provide things like the stamina buff, power infusion, and leap of faith to your group, which are all decent abilities. The more niche raid utilities in Shining Force and Master Spell are also much more useful in dungeons, allowing you to counter certain affixes like Spiteful, Sanguine, and now Bursting. On top of all this, priests also gain Mind Soothe in Shadowlands, which has proven to be quite useful in multiple dungeons, allowing for some small skips so that you have more control over your trash percent. The major downside remains, however, as all this utility is brought by Disc, who also has Holy Beat in the other categories, making it hard to put them higher than the B tier. To complete the B tier, we have Holy Paladins, who can struggle a bit in 5-man content due to their reliance on cooldowns to provide good throughput. This means during sustained damage scenarios, they can fall behind if they don't have a cooldown available, which can happen quite frequently in higher keys, especially with the seasonal affix Prideful. They are able to provide fantastic triage healing, and as mentioned previously are by far the highest damage healing spec, but this does force them to be in melee, which is significantly more dangerous in Shadowlands than it was in BFA, thanks to new melee and friendly affixes and trash mobs, which can be quite scary for low mobility paladins. Their utility does transfer quite well from raids to Mythic Plus, as things like a damage reduction, freedom, and immunities are all great in both forms of content. Lay on Hands is also a lifesaver, and abilities like Blinding Light become a lot more valuable in 5-man content, where it can be used as a pseudo AoE interrupt. In general, Holy Paladins bring great utility and damage, but they can struggle a bit with high sustained group damage, which is quite plentiful thanks to the Prideful seasonal affix, causing them to land in the B tier. Next up, we've got our A tier specs, starting with Disciplined Priests. A big strength of Disc is their ability to do respectable damage without sacrificing healing power, though their one major issue is reacting to unexpected damage, as they are an extremely proactive healing spec. This makes them have quite a high skill cap, and also makes them much better in higher end groups that pre-plan out their pulls, as opposed to pug groups who are more prone to taking avoidable damage. Aside from this, Disc has the strong DR and Absorb tools mentioned in the raid section with abilities like Barrier and Pain Suppression, and bring all the same utility as Holy Priest, with notable dungeon abilities being Master Spells, Shining Force, and Mind Soothe. They also are more mobile than Holy Priests, as they have access to more spells they can cast on the move, allowing them to get out of bad situations and still put out healing in the process. Overall, Disc is a difficult to learn healing spec, though for those that master it they can do solid damage, fantastic healing throughput, and bring great dungeon utility, giving them a spot in the A tier. Alongside Disc in the A tier, we have Resto Druids, who have been on top of the other healers in Mythic Plus for a very long time. This is due to a couple of things, the first being their mastery, which causes their hosts to gain increased power when they stack them on their party, which frees them up to spend more time DPSing, allowing them to have solid overall damage contributions over the course of the dungeon, while also putting out extremely high healing throughput. Second, while their utility tools aren't the best in raids, they are absolutely fantastic in dungeons, making them the Swiss Army knife of healers. Things like Ursul's Vortex, Typhoon, Mass Entanglement, and Cyclone are all great for mob control, allowing you to knock mobs out of sanguine puddles, enable tank kiting for necrotic, help keep spiteful ads off you and your party members, and much more. On top of this, they now have access to a speed boost and Stampeding Roar, they have Soothe to dispel the plethora of enrage abilities present in dungeons, and they're the only healer with access to a battle res, which is mandatory to have in a high-end 5-man group. This doesn't even mention their short cooldown external DR and Ironbark, as well as the Night Fate Covenant ability Convoke the Spirits, giving them the panic heal button they were previously lacking, or allowing them to put out a decent burst of damage when used alongside Balance Affinity. Essentially, Resto Druids remain one of the top options for dungeon healers, thanks to their insane utility, on-demand powerful healing throughput, and their ability to contribute a ton of damage over the course of a dungeon. With the A tier done, that leaves us once again with Resto Shamans as the only S tier healer in Mythic Plus. While Shamans don't put out the best healer damage, with Paladins, Disc Priests, and Resto Druids all being better, what they do have, as mentioned in the raid section, is the highest healer throughput by far. This allows them to breeze through many high damage situations that other healers struggle with, especially with the seasonal affix and Prideful increasing the number of these moments throughout a dungeon. Like Druids, they also have some utility spells that are much more powerful in dungeons than in raids, with things like an AoE stun and capacitor totem, a purge, as well as being the only healer with both a kick and bloodlust, which is exceptionally good in the current 5-man meta, where you tend to have multiple range DPS, so having the extra kick on your healer can be extremely important. Their only weakness is the lack of a single target DR, which can make them a bit vulnerable when it comes to healing high tank damage. However, their insane overall throughput and utility are often too good to pass on, giving them the top spot in not only raids but dungeons as well. And that concludes my healer rankings for Shadowlands Season 1 raids and Mythic Plus. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe for more content like it. If you're interested in guides to all the new PvE content Shadowlands has to offer, I have both normal and heroic raid guides, as well as mythic dungeon guides on my channel, so feel free to check them out. If you want to keep up to date with me, you can follow me on Twitter or check me out on Twitch, both at Tactics. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.